Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Nery, he had this to say. He said, "I'm not moving up until I win all 4 titles." Mexico's Nery does not intend to move up to super bantamweight until after winning all of the belts in the bantamweight division. And that is why he hopes to demonstrate his quality on July 20th in Las Vegas against Juan Carlos Payano. And then he wants to start collecting championships from fighters like Zolani Tete, Naoya Inoue, Nordine Ubali, and whoever appears.
It's the first time we're out of Tijuana. I have less distractions and more concentration. Sometimes it's difficult to focus on Tijuana and it's necessary to get away. I have everything here. My trainer, Israel Ramirez, he made a good work plan and we're executing it. And sometimes Ivan Calderon gives me advice, said Nery to ESPN Deportes. People want me to fight with Naoya Inoue. They ask because they know I'm one of the best and many have me as number 1. There will be surprises ahead. We're going for champions. They know I'm the strongest. We will not go to Super Bantam until we have won the 4 belts. We want the fight with Inoue, but first Payano, and then we'll see if Nordine Ubali, Naoya Inoue, or Zolani Tete come about.
But I leave that to Fernando Beltran, president of Zanfer Promotions. Right now, I'm focused on Payano. I don't think that anyone, upon hearing this news, would have any aversions to it. You understand that what Luis Nery very much means to do before leaving the weight class is to square off against anyone and everyone who's got a belt. I don't think anyone's in opposition of him doing that. I'm not in opposition of him doing that. You understand? If that's what he means to do, that's fan-fucking-tastic. But there are realities to be addressed here. You see, it just so happens that at the beginning of this year, in January, Luis Nery signed with the PBC. And all those other guys, all those other aforementioned fighters, those guys are in bed with other outfits. You know, there is talk that if Naoya Inoue wins the World Boxing Super Series, if he emerges the victor in the final, where he will be squaring off against Nonito Donaire, there are rumors, there is talk that if Naoya Inoue wins that fight, he's going to sign with Top Rank. And if he does, where does that leave a fight with Luis Nery? I mean, do I have to tell you? Do I have to repeat it for the 100th fucking time how much PBC is averse to having to work with the people over there at Top Rank? I don't think I need to tell you that. And if I do, then you know, you haven't been paying attention. Essentially what I'm getting at is that Luis Nery, upon returning, you know, because he had the whole thing, Yamanaka, suspension, banned substances, what have you, all of that came and went. And at the beginning of this year, he struck a deal with the PBC, and he's been fighting there ever since. His last fight with McJoe Arroyo, that fight was on the undercard for the Errol Spence versus Mikey Garcia pay-per-view. His upcoming fight with Payano, that fight is going to be on the undercard for the Keith Thurman versus Manny Pacquiao pay-per-view. Now, granted that he is a Zanfer Promotions fighter, but guess what? He's also being handled by the PBC. You understand? He's very much a PBC guy. I mean, that's where he's fighting. Those are the cards that you can find his name under. PBC cards. So those things in mind, in spite of what ambitions and endeavors he means to have in the future, you can't ignore or understate the role that him being in bed with the PBC might play in what he does thereafter. You can't ignore it. That he's a PBC guy. And these other guys that are out there, these other guys that he's talking about, these are guys that are in bed with other outfits that the PBC may not want to work with. You take the WBO champion, Zolani Tete, for example. You know, his promoter is Frank Warren. Frank Warren, who has ties to Top Rank, Bob Arum, ESPN. You see what matchups are feasible because of who Zolani Tete is in bed with. Earlier this year, there were rumblings that they may match Zolani Tete, who had to pull out of the World Boxing Super Series. There were talks that they may match Zolani Tete against former champion Ryan Burnett. Okay? So there are possibilities for a fighter like Zolani Tete. There are possibilities for a fighter like Naoya Inoue or Nordine Ubali. There are possibilities. But for a PBC fighter, you know, a guy who's on that side of the street who would have to thereby work with other outfits to see those fights get made, I'm telling you, I'm not holding my breath. I would like to see Luis Nery
fight those kinds of fighters in those kinds of fights. Of course I would. But the reality is the politics of boxing may hamper things for Luis Nery in all the ways that they've hampered things for other fighters. I mean, there's got to be a fucking reason that a fighter like Marcus Brown, for example, a PBC fighter, is sitting here today with not just one, but two avenues to fight for a world title. Yet, he's not fighting for a world title in his next fight. He's fighting a Jean Pascal in his next fight, you know? And I have no doubts that the politics of boxing have a lot to do with that because, well, when it comes to the PBC at light heavyweight, they don't have any belts for their guys to fight for. This is likely the reason that instead of moving into a world title opportunity, a fighter like Marcus Brown is being matched against what fighters they can conjure for him because the champions aren't on their side of the street. And I reiterate that I've got no doubts that may become a factor in the case of Luis Nery, that you might want to go belt hunting. You might want to go hunting for the scalps of the world champions at the weight. But the reality of it is that none of those fights might come off until, unless something changes, unless Luis Nery severs ties to the PBC and crosses to another side of the street, because I honestly can't see it happening with him there. I wouldn't be the least bit disappointed if it did, if the PBC extended an olive branch or let that fighter go somewhere else for a time to have the fight. I'm not averse to it. I'm just saying that it's not likely to happen given their reputation. What you really got to do to understand this is you've got to look at the topographical environment of a weight class to see who's in bed with who and what is feasible in that kind of an environment. We know that the WBC champion Nordine Oubaali was in action just a couple of days ago against Villanueva. Now, where did that fight take place? You understand? Who was showing that fight? ESPN Plus was showing that fight. That's who. ESPN Plus. You think about that. This guy's last fight was on ESPN. You think about the WBO champion, Zolani Tete. He's a Frank Warren fighter. Frank Warren, who has ties to Top Rank, and Bob Arum. Bob Arum, who is tied to ESPN Plus, ESPN, and so on and so forth. And you see the network. You understand? You see how a fight between those two guys, a unification fight between the WBC champion, Oubaali, and the WBO champion, Tete, is actually more feasible than anything that would involve Luis Nery, who's in bed with the PBC. You think about what Top Rank means to do if Naoya Inoue is successful, if he emerges the victor in the final against Nonito Donaire and picks up those two world titles. He's in possession of the IBF now. He's got to pick up the WBA from Donaire. And you think about what if he does it, and what if Top Rank brings him over to their side of the street? That will give them all the champions at the weight, okay? And unless the people over there at the PBC change their business practices, and who knows? But unless they do, it'll look like Luis Nery, good fighter that he might be, however you feel about him, but it will look like he's an island. He's the odd man out. People may want to see you participate in those kinds of fights against those kinds of opponents, but at the end of the day, are the people at the PBC going to let you? That's the question. So, I heard these comments from Luis Nery, and yes, it is ambitious. That's what you want to hear. But just because that's what you want to hear doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. In other news, WBA welterweight champion Keith Thurman had this to say ahead of his upcoming fight with WBA regular champion Manny Pacquiao. He says that he's the new Pacquiao. And he highlighted how, his past fight with Sean Porter, that fight was a Fight of the Year candidate. How, he put on a great display against Danny Garcia, that he thinks he's the new Manny Pacquiao, and he thinks he's the most exciting guy at the weight. But you know what, in spite of Keith's hyperbole, because that's what it is, he's just trying to sell the fight, I'm not even sure that he himself believes what he's saying, but better still, whether he believes it or not is besides the point, because there are realities to be addressed here. Since the fight's announcement, if you can believe this, Keith Thurman's not the betting favorite to win this fight. He's not. The bookies have got Manny Pacquiao as the favorite to win this thing. I mean, that's what's happened since the fight's, inception and its subsequent announcement and leading up to it. Manny Pacquiao is now favored to beat Keith Thurman, if you can believe that. And it really is a strange turn of events because not that long ago, people were talking about Manny Pacquiao in the context that this guy
he can't win a belt from any of the young champions that are out there. I mean, boxing fans have just some of the shortest fucking memories known to man. I mean, these guys, they get amnesia like it's nobody's fucking business. But the reality of it is, yes, not that long ago, those were the kinds of conversations involving Manny Pacquiao, the kind where this is a fighter
He's getting older.
who is in the twilight of his career, and he's probably only got 1 or 2 fights left, but nobody envisioned that he would be the betting favorite against a young champion, a young undefeated champion, I should say.
Like Keith Thurman.
All of a sudden, the tables have turned, and the question is why? Well, I'm going to be completely honest when I say this, and I know that some people here on the channel aren't going to like it, but I think that a lot of the reason, at least a part of it, that people's perceptions of the fight have changed is due to that announcement that VADA is not going to be handling the testing for this fight, rather the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Let's be honest with ourselves, people. What is motivating this turn of the tide, this change of heart that people are having? Because not that long ago, Manny Pacquiao was viewed as a fighter who's on his way out and can't win a belt from any of the young lions. There were plenty of people running around saying that shit, and they have all but disappeared. And I've no doubts that has something to do with it. That all of a sudden, where, you're required to use VADA testing for any fight involving a WBA title via the Fair Boxing Program, which is co-run by the WBA and VADA, all of a sudden, VADA's going to be left out of this, and the Nevada State Athletic Commission is going to be handling the testing. Why the change? I discussed that in a previous video, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. Better still, there is that to consider, and then there is Keith Thurman's demeanor and his last showing against Josecito Lopez. A showing that showed that, Keith Thurman, he had some cobwebs to shake off. He had a lot of ring rust because he looked very vulnerable out there. He looked very human. Was the fight entertaining? Was there back and forth? Was it thrilling? Yes. But it was thrilling because we saw that Keith Thurman was in danger, that he was hurt, that he had to survive. That's what was thrilling about it. So it's not a situation to where you've got a young undefeated fighter who's all in his prime and has all this momentum, and it's a foregone conclusion that he beats the older fighter. It's not a situation like that. What it is a young champion, yes, who is undefeated, yes, but people are questioning his desire to establish himself as one of the more dominant forces in the division. You think about how Keith Thurman talks about himself. He sounds like somebody's fucking uncle out here, reliving the glory days. I mean, you're still talking about the Sean Porter fight? That was years ago. The Danny Garcia fight, yes? Keith Thurman won the fight, and he did unify titles in the process, and in doing so, he did, at that time, become the most accomplished guy at the weight. But since that, what the fuck has he done aside from surviving against Josecito Lopez? And that was after he took what looked like over a year hiatus, close to 2 years, something like that.
Just about.
I mean, what I'm getting at is he's revisiting these fights that took place some time ago. And they were great fights. The Porter fight was a great fight. The Danny Garcia fight, well, that was a mixed bag. There were a lot of people on Sunday morning who weren't impressed with what they saw. So you see Keith doing these things, and it kind of feeds the narrative, because that's what it is. It's a narrative, that Keith Thurman might not actually be a hungry fighter right now. That the reason that you turned down a guy like Terrence Crawford to square off against a guy like Manny Pacquiao is because you view it as an easy payday. You see Manny Pacquiao's age, but you also see his marquee value. So to you, you've chosen the path of least resistance, because that's what it is. To you, from where you're sitting, that's how it looks, and that's why you went that way. And what that denotes is that Keith Thurman might not be hungry. I mean, look at how he's talking about the Spence fight. He's talking about next year and all of this other stuff. Look at how he's talking about it. So you got a fighter who people are questioning. You've got another fighter who, yes, he's older, but he does seem to have the desire, the vim and vigor of a younger man to win. And then you tie in the intangibles in regards to VADA, how they're not handling the testing, how the Nevada State Athletic Commission is handling the testing, and how there are people out there who suspect that Manny Pacquiao may be on something. Rest assured, he's innocent until proven guilty. That much is certain. But that there are people out there who think he might be on the sauce, yes, there are those people. What do you want me to say? There are people out there who think he's a dirty fighter. Whether you think he's a dirty fighter or not is besides the point, because there are those people. And that is affecting their perceptions of the fight. And what I think that many of Manny Pacquiao's fans get confused about whenever I broach this subject is, I'm not saying that this guy is or isn't a dirty fighter.
We don't know.
I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that there are people out there who think he is. There are those people that are of that school of thought. And they look at this situation with VADA, VADA not conducting the testing for this fight as opposed to the Nevada State Athletic Commission. They look at that, and to them, they think that's a window of opportunity for Manny to cheat. So that affects their perceptions of the fight, and that might explain why there are more people picking Manny to win this thing than there are people picking Thurman to win this thing. That is how you can explain it, because not that long ago, what seemed to be the consensus was that Manny's, he's almost, he's close to retirement. He's done about all he needs to do in the sport of boxing. He's not going to win a title from one of these young guys. These are the kinds of things that people were saying not that long ago. Yet all of a sudden, all that kind of talk has evaporated. And now more people are picking Manny to win this fight than people are picking Keith to win this fight. That is what I'm acknowledging, ladies and gentlemen. In truth, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to the sport of boxing that guys like me and you are never going to know. We don't know why they decided to use the Nevada State Athletic Commission instead of VADA. We don't know, and we're not going to know. Who really fucking knows? But we may not know why they made that decision right here and right now. We don't know. So let's focus on what we do know. Keith Thurman, they wanted him. Before the fight materialized, before it was official, before it actually came into fruition that these guys are going to fight, before any of that, Freddie Roach, Manny Pacquiao, they made it known that that is a guy that they would like to fight. There has to be a reason for that. There has to be. They view him as beatable, but why?
Before the Lopez fight.
Why him more so than Terrence Crawford? You understand? Why him more so than that guy? It's like people forgot that Manny Pacquiao was on the same side of the street as Terrence Crawford, but he didn't express the same enthusiasm for Crawford that he has been expressing for Keith Thurman. And the same applies for Freddie Roach. Just as well, Errol Spence. I have seen more enthusiasm from the Pacquiao camp to face a Keith Thurman, who he's going to be fighting, more than I've seen enthusiasm for Manny to face an Errol Spence. So there has to be a reason for that. There has to be a reason that, they were saying, if we can't get a rematch with Floyd, we'll take Keith Thurman. I think about all these different things. And then I look over at the type of stuff that Keith Thurman's saying. It's almost like he's talking about a different fight, Think about how much shit this guy's saying. He's the most exciting. He's the most accomplished. He's the new Manny Pacquiao. And I see these things, and what really resonates with me, out of all the shit that's going on in regards to this fight, what really resonates with me is that Keith Thurman can't go out there against Manny Pacquiao and put on a performance similar to the one he put on against Danny Garcia. That's saying that he can't go out there against this guy doing just enough. He has to go out there, and he can't look anything short of fan-fucking-tastic. Because the reality of it is that you are facing the much older fighter in the fight. And you're talking more shit than a little bit. So intangibles aside, variables aside, VADA aside, betting favorites aside, for Keith Thurman, he can't go out there and try to coast. You can't coast against this guy. You coast against this guy, and this might be a banana peel in more ways than one. I really feel like out of all the different things we talk about in regards to this fight, that's what resonates with me the most. That Keith better go out there, and he better not look anything short of fucking incredible.